The air in the dressing room at the Sands Hotel and Casino smelled of stale tobacco, expensive cologne, and the faint metallic tang of adrenaline that never quite went away, no matter how many times you walked out to face the lights. It was 1961, and Las Vegas was a neon oasis carved out of the crushing dark of the Nevada desert, a place where sin was industrialized and silence was the only thing you couldn't buy. Dino Paul Crocetti, known to the world as Dean Martin, adjusted the black bow tie in the mirror, his heavy-lidded eyes staring back with that trademark sleepy nonchalance that fooled everyone, sometimes even himself. He took a slow breath, letting the chaotic noise of the backstage area fade into a low hum. Before he reached the tumbler of apple juice that the audience would swear was scotch, his hand went into his pocket, his fingers brushing the worn ridges of a silver medallion. It was St. Anthony, the patron of lost things. Dean wasn't lost, but in a town built on losing, it paid to have a saint in your corner. He murmured a quick, silent prayer, not for fame or applause. He had enough of that to drown in, but for grace. The kind of grace his mother, Angela, had spoken about back in Steubenville. The grace that meant keeping your soul upright even when the world tried to bend you into a shape it found more convenient. He stepped out into the hallway, the familiar chaotic rhythm of the show engulfing him. Showgirls in feathers that cost more than a Cadillac brushed past. Musicians tuned brass instruments that gleamed under the harsh service lights, and stagehands moved with the grim efficiency of trench soldiers. But tonight, the air felt heavier. There was a static charge, a tension that pricked at the back of Dean's neck. As he approached the wings, his road manager, a sweating, nervous man named Mac, grabbed his arm. Mac's face was pale, his eyes darting toward the curtain. He whispered that Sal the butcher Moretti was in the house. The name landed like a stone in deep water. Moretti wasn't just a wise guy. He was a relic of the old, brutal code, a man who believed that owning a piece of the strip meant owning the souls of the people who worked there. He had been muscling in on the unions, the vending machines, and now, it seemed, he wanted to muscle in on the entertainment. He was sitting at the center table, right against the stage, flanked by three men who looked like they were carved out of granite and bad intentions. They hadn't paid for the table. They had simply taken it, terrified waiters scrambling to accommodate them. Dean nodded, his expression unchanging. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating the sharp angles of his handsome face. He knew men like Moretti. He had grown up around them, served them drinks in speakeasies, seen them in the pool halls of Ohio. They were men who mistook fear for respect, who thought that because they could break a man's legs, they could command his heart. Dean exhaled a plume of blue smoke, patted Mac on the shoulder, and said with a wink that everything was cool. Then the announcer's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Dean Martin." The band kicked into the swinging opening intro, and Dean glided onto the stage, the tuxedo fitting him like a second skin, the cigarette dangling from his lips, the drink in hand. The roar of the crowd was a physical wave, a wall of love and expectation. He worked the room instantly, that effortless charm radiating outward. He feigned a stumble, slurred a greeting, and the room erupted in laughter. This was the act. The lovable drunk, the king of cool who didn't give a damn. But as his eyes scanned the front row, the act tightened into armor. There he was. Sal Moretti sat like a toad on a lily pad, occupying the prime real estate. He was a thick-set man with a face scarred by teenage knife fights and eyes that were dead and flat, like a shark's. He wasn't laughing. While the rest of the room, filled with tourists from the Midwest, high rollers from New York, and starlets hoping to be seen, was caught up in the magic, Moretti was staring at Dean with a proprietary sneer. He had a bottle of expensive red wine in front of him, and he was ignoring the waiters. Dean launched into When You're Smiling, his baritone voice rich and warm like melted chocolate, filling the Copa room. He moved through the first few numbers with his usual grace, cracking jokes about Frank, about drinking, about the weather. But every time he looked down, Moretti was there, talking loudly to his henchmen, clinking glasses with violent force, deliberately trying to break the rhythm of the show. It was a power play. He was telling the room, and Dean, that he was the real attraction here. The tension ratcheted up during a quiet interlude. Dean was perched on a stool, the lights dimmed to a single spot, preparing to sing a ballad. It was a moment meant for intimacy, for the vulnerability that Dean rarely showed but always possessed. Just as the piano player struck the opening chord, Moretti's voice cut through the darkness like a whip. He shouted for Dean to stop the sappy garbage and sing something Italian, something for him. The room froze. The air was sucked out of the Copa room. The piano player hesitated, his hands hovering over the keys. This wasn't a friendly heckle. This was a command from a man who was used to having people die for disobeying him. The tourists didn't know who Moretti was, but they knew the tone of violence. They shifted in their seats, terrified. The illusion of the glamorous, carefree Vegas night was shattering. Dean didn't flinch. He didn't look angry. He took a slow drag of a cigarette, the ember glowing bright red in the semi-darkness. He looked down at Moretti, a small, crooked smile playing on his lips. He leaned into the microphone, the intimacy of the moment amplifying his calm. He told the audience that he had a request from a friend down front who obviously had excellent taste in volume, if not in timing. The crowd chuckled nervously, desperate for the tension to break. Dean tried to pivot, signaling the band to play Volare, a compromise to appease a mobster. But Moretti wasn't interested in compromise. He stood up, his massive frame blocking the view for people behind him. He held up a glass of his wine and barked that he didn't want Dean to just sing. He wanted Dean to come down off the stage, drink with him, and toast the Moretti family before he sang another note. It was a blatant attempt to humiliate the star, to show everyone that the famous Dean Martin was just another employee, another puppet on Moretti's string. The silence that followed was deafening. The band was silent. The waiters stopped moving. Backstage, Mac was likely dialing the police or a priest. This was the moment where the script ended. A lesser man would have made a joke to defuse it. A weaker man would have gone down and had the drink to avoid trouble. An arrogant man would have called security and started a brawl. Dean did none of those things. He looked at the glass of wine in Moretti's hand, then at the man's face, then up at the ceiling lights, as if consulting with the Almighty. He remembered the Sunday mornings in Steubenville, the smell of incense, the priest talking about the dignity of the human spirit. He remembered his father, a barber who stood on his feet all day but never bowed anyone. Dean realized that if he went down those stairs, he wasn't just drinking wine. He was selling the one thing that was truly his. Dean walked to the edge of the stage, towering over Moretti not by height, but by presence. He placed his drink on the stool. He placed a cigarette in the ashtray. He stood there, stripped of props, just a man in a tuxedo. He looked Moretti dead in the eye, his expression shifting from the court jester to something ancient and formidable. The sleepy look vanished. The eyes that stared back were sharp, intelligent, and completely fearless. He spoke into the microphone, his voice low, lacking the slur, lacking the joke. He said clearly and evenly that he was on stage to work, to give these people a show, to give them a memory. He said that the stage was a sacred place, a place where the music was the boss, not the man with the loudest voice or the biggest wad of cash. Moretti turned purple. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. He threatened Dean, shouting that he made guys like him, and he could break them. The threat hung in the air, ugly and raw. The crowd gasped. This was it. Violence was seconds away. But Dean didn't recoil. He didn't signal for help. He just smiled, but it wasn't a stage smile. It was a smile of pity. He leaned down, close enough that Moretti could see the sweat on his brow, and spoke into the mic so the whole room could hear. He told Moretti that he could break a lot of things, maybe even legs, but he couldn't buy class, and he certainly couldn't buy the song. He told him that in this room, tonight, the music was a gift from God, and you don't demand gifts, you receive them with gratitude. He said it with such casual, devastating authority that Moretti looked small. Then Dean did the unthinkable. He turned his back on the mobster. It was a move of supreme dismissal. He walked back to the center of the stage, picked up his drink, and looked at the band. "Boys," he said, his voice cool and steady, "let's play something for the people who came here for the love, not the noise." He snapped his fingers. The drummer, emboldened by Dean's courage, hit the snare. The brass section, seeing their leader standing tall, blew the roof off. Dean launched into Return to Me, singing with a passion and power that he usually saved for the recording studio. The lyrics, pleading and romantic, took on a new meaning. It was a call for a return to decency, to honor, to the things that actually mattered. Moretti stood there, mouth agape. He looked around the room, expecting to see fear. Instead, he saw something worse, mockery. A couple at a nearby table started clapping. Then another. Then a laugh rippled through the room. Not at Dean, but at the impotent rage of the bully who had been defanged by a crooner. The spell of terror Moretti relied on was broken. He was no longer the terrifying gangster. He was just a rude interrupter who had been schooled. The power dynamic had inverted completely. Dean held the room in the palm of his hand, not through force, but through the sheer weight of his character. He was a host, the patriarch of the evening, and Moretti was an unruly guest. Moretti, sensing the shift, realizing he had lost the room, and that to attack Dean now would turn the entire city against him, turned redder. He kicked his chair back, knocking it over. He signaled his men. They stood up, straightening their jackets, tried to regain some shred of dignity. They marched out of the Copa room, the heavy doors swinging shut behind them. As they left, the applause started. It began as a tentative patter and swelled into a thunderous ovation. It wasn't just for the song. It was for the man. They were cheering for the victory of the cool, calm individual over the brute force of the mob. They were cheering because Dean had stood up for them, for their night, for their right to enjoy beauty without fear. Dean watched them leave from the corner of his eye. He didn't gloat. He didn't make a snide remark as the door closed. That would have been cheap. He simply finished the song, holding the final note with a breath control that defied medical science. When the song ended, he bowed deeply and humbly. He looked at the empty table, then up at the crowd, and gave a small, genuine shrug, as if to say, "Can you believe that guy?" The tension melted into pure joy. The rest of the show was electric. Dean was on fire. He danced, he joked, he sang Italian street songs and American standards. He brought the room together, forging a connection that was spiritual in its intensity. He was a high priest of the sands, dispensing the sacrament of joy. When the curtain finally fell, hours later, the applause continued for 10 minutes. Dean walked off stage, sweat soaking through his shirt, his adrenaline crashing. He walked past the cheering showgirls, past the relieved musicians who were patting him on the back, calling him a hero. He smiled and nodded, saying it was nothing, just a little misunderstanding. He made his way back to the dressing room, the sanctuary of silence. He closed the door and locked it. The smell of stale tobacco was still there, comforting and familiar. He loosened his tie and unbuttoned his collar. He stared at himself in the mirror. The king of cool looked back, but the eyes were tired. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the St. Anthony medal again. He rubbed it with his thumb. His hand was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the restraint it had taken to remain still when every instinct screamed to fight. He poured himself a real drink this time, a finger scotch, and sat in the chair. He thought about the thin line he walked, the line between the glitz and the gutter, between the holy and the profane. He thought about the guys he grew up with, guys who ended up like Moretti because they didn't have a voice or a guitar, or a mother who prayed for them. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the fame, but for the strength to be a man, not a caricature. He took a sip of the scotch, feeling the burn. He remembered a verse in the Bible his grandmother used to quote, something about a soft answer turning away wrath. He had given the soft answer, but backed by a spine of steel. He realized that true heroism wasn't about swinging punches. It was about knowing who you were so thoroughly that no one else could tell you otherwise. He had reclaimed the stage, not just for himself, but for the art form. A knock came at the door. It was Frank. Sinatra stuck his head in, his blue eyes wide. He had heard the story already. News traveled faster than light in Vegas. "Dino," Frank said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I heard you stare down the butcher. You crazy son of a gun." Dean looked up, the sleepy mask sliding back into place. He grinned, the old mischievous spark returning. "I didn't stare him down, Frank," Dean drawled, his voice relaxed and warm. "I just reminded him that there's a 2-drink minimum, and he was taking up too much space." Frank laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "You're one of a kind, Pally. One of a kind." As Frank left, Closing the door, Dean Martin sat alone in the quiet. He closed his eyes, listening to hum of the casino beyond the walls, the sound of a world that was always hungry, always turning. He wasn't afraid of it anymore. He touched the metal one last time, whispered a grazie to the empty room, and started to hum a melody, a soft, slow Italian lullaby, reclaiming the silence, owning the night, a man at peace in the center of the storm.